Mysterious hiker. This photograph, taken on a quiet forest trail near Olympia, Washington, has become a source of deep unease for those who have seen it. What was meant to be a simple nature image has instead transformed into a puzzling and unsettling mystery that resists easy explanation. The forest appears ordinary at first glance: a wooded path, wooden steps leading upward, sunlight filtering through dense green foliage. Yet closer inspection reveals something far more troubling. The image was captured during a family outing involving 5 people. As 4 members continued ahead along the trail, one woman paused behind to photograph the empty path. She was known for carefully composing her nature photographs and was particularly attentive to ensuring that no people appeared in the frame. Before taking the picture, she reportedly looked down the trail and confirmed that it was completely clear. Only later, when reviewing the image, did something unexpected appear. In the distance, partially obscured by shadow and trees, stands a solitary figure dressed in blue. The form appears upright and still, positioned squarely on the path where moments earlier no one had been present. Even more unsettling is what the figure seems to be holding. When the image is magnified, it appears to be grasping a long object resembling either an axe or a scythe, held at its side in a manner that feels deliberate rather than accidental. The blur surrounding the figure is attributed to digital magnification, yet the shape itself remains distinct enough to raise concern. What troubles viewers most is the absence of any reasonable explanation. There were no other hikers in the area, no sound of footsteps, and no indication that anyone had entered the trail between the moment of observation and the instant the photograph was taken. The forest was calm and quiet, offering no clues as to how such a figure could appear unnoticed. Since the image surfaced, many have suggested that it represents something beyond an ordinary passerby. The stillness of the figure, its sudden presence, and the symbolic nature of the object it appears to carry have led some to believe the photograph may have captured a fleeting and unexplained presence. Whether an optical anomaly, a momentary overlap of realities, or something far stranger, the photograph remains a haunting reminder that even familiar places can hold unsettling secrets, revealed only when least expected. Mysterious photograph of a humanoid. This mysterious photograph has circulated quietly for years, captivating those who believe it may document a rare and unintended encounter with a non-human presence. Taken in a remote forest setting beside a calm lake, the image appears to show a small, slender figure standing alone near the water's edge. The figure's pale coloration, elongated limbs, and unusually large head have led many observers to associate it with the classic description of a so-called grey alien. What makes the image especially compelling is its setting. The forest appears undisturbed, with tall trees framing the shoreline and no visible signs of human activity. There are no buildings, paths, or people nearby, and the isolation of the location suggests the photograph was taken during a quiet nature excursion rather than a staged event. The figure itself stands upright, facing the water, with a posture that seems deliberate rather than accidental. Its proportions do not match those of a child or an adult human, adding to the sense that something unfamiliar has been captured. Supporters of the alien interpretation point to the figure's head, which appears significantly larger than would be expected in normal human anatomy. The neck seems thin, the body narrow, and the overall silhouette lacks the bulk or clothing detail typically seen in people photographed at a distance. Even accounting for perspective and grain, the proportions remain striking. The pale tone of the figure also contrasts sharply with the darker greens and browns of the surrounding forest, making it stand out in an unsettling way. The distance from which the photograph was taken only deepens the mystery. The figure is far enough away to prevent clear identification, yet close enough to show a distinct shape that does not easily align with known animals. There is no visible motion blur, suggesting the figure was standing still at the moment the image was captured. For those who believe the photograph is genuine, it represents a fleeting glimpse of something not meant to be seen, preserved by chance rather than intention. The mystery of the Serapium of Saqqara. The Serapium of Saqqara is one of the most mysterious and perplexing sites in ancient Egypt. Discovered in 1850 by French archaeologist Auguste Mariette, this underground complex has defied clear explanation for over a century. Within its vast corridors lie 24 massive sarcophagi, each weighing between 70 and 100 tons, meticulously placed in individual chambers. While the mainstream theory suggests that the Serapeum served as a burial site for the sacred Apis bulls, several unresolved questions cast doubt on this interpretation. The construction, materials, and sheer size of the sarcophagi raise significant challenges to conventional explanations, leaving scholars and researchers puzzled about the true purpose of this ancient site. One of the most perplexing aspects of the Serapeum is the sheer scale of the sarcophagi. These enormous granite boxes far exceed the size required to house the remains of the Apis bulls. If these were indeed tombs, why were they built so much larger than necessary? This question becomes even more intriguing when considering the burial practices of Egyptian royalty. Pharaohs, who were regarded as divine rulers, were often buried in sarcophagi barely large enough to accommodate their bodies. The contrast between their burial arrangements and the vast boxes of the Serapeum suggests that these structures may have served a different function altogether. The choice of materials used in the construction of the sarcophagi also presents a significant mystery. The ancient Egyptians predominantly used limestone for their burial chambers, as it was readily available and easier to work with. However, the sarcophagi in the Serapeum were crafted from rose granite and even diorite, some of the hardest stones known to man. These materials were not only difficult to carve, but were also transported from quarries over 800 kilometers away. The logistical challenges of moving such massive stones across such distances in an era without modern machinery have left historians questioning how and why such an effort was undertaken. Adding to the mystery is the fact that several of the sarcophagi were found empty upon their discovery. Some lids were blown open using gunpowder in the 19th century, yet no remains were found inside. If the Serapeum was truly a burial site for the Apis bulls, why were there no mummified remains? Given that the Apis bulls were considered divine and highly revered, it is difficult to believe that their remains would have simply disappeared or been removed without leaving any trace. There is also the question of the precision with which these sarcophagi were crafted. Modern engineers and stonemasons have expressed astonishment at the level of accuracy in the stone-cutting techniques used to construct the boxes. The interiors of the sarcophagi are incredibly smooth, with angles that appear almost perfectly squared. Some researchers argue that such precision would be nearly impossible to achieve using the primitive tools that were available during ancient Egyptian times. This has led some to speculate that the Serapeum may have been built using advanced knowledge of mathematics and engineering that has since been lost to history. The tunnels of the Serapeum further complicate the mystery. These passageways, carved deep beneath the surface, were not mere tombs, but an extensive subterranean network. Their scale and complexity suggest they served a purpose beyond that of a simple burial site. Some alternative theories suggest that the Serapeum could have been a site of initiation for priests, a repository for sacred knowledge, or even a power storage facility based on unknown ancient technologies. While mainstream Egyptologists continue to support the Apis bull theory, skeptics argue that the lack of physical evidence and the anomalous nature of the site demand a more nuanced explanation. Some theorists have even ventured into the realm of alternative history, proposing that the Serapeum may be a remnant of a lost civilization with advanced technological capabilities. These theories remain speculative, but they highlight the deep fascination and mystery surrounding this ancient site. Despite extensive studies, the Serapium of Saqqara remains one of the greatest archaeological mysteries of all time. The sheer magnitude of the sarcophagi, the mystery surrounding their function, and the advanced craftsmanship required for their construction all suggest that the site was of immense significance. Until new evidence emerges, the true purpose of the Serapeum will continue to elude historians, leaving it as one of the most intriguing and mysterious places in ancient Egypt. The unsolved case of U.S. Attorney Jonathan Luna. The mystery of Jonathan Luna remains one of the most disturbing and controversial unresolved cases involving a federal prosecutor in United States history. What occurred during his final hours in early December 2003 has never been fully explained, and the deeper the case is examined, the more troubling it becomes. Despite years of investigation, internal reviews, and public scrutiny, the circumstances surrounding Jonathan's disappearance and subsequent discovery continue to defy resolution, leaving his family without closure and the public with serious questions. Jonathan Paul Luna was born on the 21st of October, 1965, in New York City. He was the second of two sons born to Paul and Rose Luna and grew up in the Patterson housing project in the South Bronx. Later in life, Jonathan would describe his neighborhood not as a place of despair, but as one filled with promise and resilience. Growing up near Yankee Stadium, he became a lifelong fan of the New York Yankees, a passion that remained with him throughout adulthood. Jonathan was widely regarded as intelligent, personable, and driven. As a young man, he initially aspired to become a journalist, drawn to storytelling and public service. During high school, however, he redirected his ambitions toward law, believing it offered a more direct path to justice. He attended Fordham University for his undergraduate studies before enrolling at the University of North Carolina School of Law. It was there that he met Angela Hopkins, a medical student who would later become his wife. The couple married on the 29th of August, 1993, and eventually welcomed two sons. Angela went on to become an obstetrician, while Jonathan built a promising legal career. He worked first as a prosecutor in Brooklyn before accepting a position as an assistant United States attorney in Baltimore, Maryland. The move was a proud milestone for Jonathan, and he soon relocated his parents closer to him so they could remain a close-knit family. By most outward appearances, Jonathan's life was stable and fulfilling. He was devoted to his family, respected by colleagues, and deeply invested in his work. However, the year 2003 brought mounting professional pressure. Jonathan reportedly fell into disfavor with his superior, Thomas A. DiBiagio, and feared the possibility of losing his position. Although DiBiagio later denied that Jonathan's job was in jeopardy, a former colleague stated that Jonathan was concerned enough to retain an attorney. At the same time, Jonathan's final case was unraveling. The prosecution involved two Baltimore heroin dealers, and a key informant connected to the case had begun refusing to cooperate. The informant also changed testimony while on the stand, significantly weakening the case. Jonathan was in the process of drafting a plea agreement, attempting to salvage the situation. Compounding matters further, a separate issue involving $36,000 that had gone missing from a robbery case he previously handled had surfaced, and Jonathan was scheduled to undergo a polygraph examination regarding the matter. On the evening of the 3rd of December, 2003, Jonathan returned to his office shortly before 9 in the evening to work on the plea deal. Some sources suggest that he had been home earlier and returned to the courthouse after receiving a late-night phone call from an unknown individual. What is certain is that at 11:38 that night, his silver 1999 Honda Accord exited the parking garage of the United States District Courthouse in Baltimore. From that point forward, Jonathan's movements can only be traced through toll booth records and debit card transactions. His vehicle passed through the Fort McHenry Toll Plaza on Interstate 95 at 11:49 in the evening. Shortly after midnight, he continued north through the Perryville Toll Plaza, then crossed the Delaware state line. At 12:57 in the morning, his debit card was used to withdraw $200 at an automated teller machine in Newark, Delaware. Jonathan's vehicle continued its journey, entering the New Jersey Turnpike before crossing into Pennsylvania. At approximately 3:20 in the morning, his debit card was used again, this time to purchase fuel at a Sunoco station in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. By 4 o'clock in the morning, his Honda exited the Pennsylvania Turnpike at the Reading and Lancaster interchange. At approximately 5:30 that morning, an employee arriving for work at Sensenig and Weaver, a well drilling company near Denver, Pennsylvania, noticed Jonathan's vehicle parked behind the building. Upon closer inspection, the employee observed dark smears on the driver's side door and front fender. Looking down toward a nearby creek, he discovered Jonathan's body. Denver, Pennsylvania, is roughly 100 miles from Baltimore, yet the indirect route Jonathan took covered approximately 135 miles. What compelled him to travel there remains unknown. Coroner Barry Wolpe later concluded that Jonathan had sustained dozens of injuries caused by a sharp object, primarily to his neck, shoulders, and back. While submersion in water was determined to be the final cause, the manner was ruled a homicide. Wolpe believed Jonathan may have been harmed for the purpose of extracting information. Inside Jonathan's vehicle, investigators found a pool of blood on the rear floorboard, and a toll ticket stained with blood, indicating that he had already been injured before reaching the final location. His wallet, credit cards, and most of the cash withdrawn from the ATM were still present, scattered around the vehicle. This raised immediate doubts about robbery as a motive. Equally puzzling were the items left behind. Jonathan's cell phone and eyeglasses, which he reportedly required for driving, were still on his desk at the courthouse. This suggested that he may have left abruptly, possibly under pressure or duress. The investigation, led jointly by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Pennsylvania State Police, quickly became controversial. Federal sources stated that Jonathan had no defensive wounds, implying a self-inflicted scenario. However, those who handled Jonathan's body strongly disputed this. Kim McLeod, who prepared him for viewing, stated that his hands showed extensive damage consistent with resistance. Police officers at the scene reportedly agreed. A massive search of the surrounding area was conducted using floodlights and more than 100 cadets. No weapon was found. 2 months later, Jonathan's small penknife was discovered nearby, and authorities suggested it may have been involved. Critics questioned how such a tool could account for the extensive injuries described. Soon after, damaging claims about Jonathan's personal life were released. Federal investigators suggested he had undisclosed debt and had been active on dating websites. His family and friends strongly rejected these claims. His father stated that Jonathan and Angela shared a loving relationship, a sentiment echoed by close friends who insisted he had neither financial troubles nor romantic entanglements. In later years, allegations of misconduct emerged regarding how the investigation was handled. A Department of Justice Inspector General report cited credible evidence of serious procedural failures. Private investigators hired by the Luna family alleged a cover-up involving corrupt federal agents. One investigator suggested a possible link between Jonathan's case and the later disappearance of District Attorney Ray Gricar, who had also been involved in a heroin-related matter. Attempts to force a coroner's inquest were denied, and over time, key evidence disappeared. Jonathan's vehicle itself was eventually lost and could no longer be examined. Court records related to the case were sealed, and in 2021, a judge ruled they would remain sealed indefinitely. Jonathan's parents passed away without learning what truly happened to their son. His case remains officially unresolved, with no suspects named and no definitive explanation offered. Whether Jonathan Luna was the victim of betrayal, corruption, or a failed attempt to control sensitive information, the unanswered questions continue to cast a long shadow. More than 2 decades later, the mystery endures, not only as a personal tragedy, but as a case that challenges confidence in transparency and accountability at the highest levels of the justice system. The mystery of the Val Johnson incident. On August 27, 1979, at approximately 1:40 in the morning, police officer Val Johnson was performing patrol duties in Marshall County, Minnesota. As he neared the junction with Minnesota State 220, he glanced to ensure there were no vehicles before proceeding. While observing, he encountered an intensely luminous and dazzling light that appeared to be moving towards him. However, the light did not seem to be illuminating the road. Furthermore, the lights did not resemble the headlights of an approaching vehicle. The object was positioned around 4 feet above the ground and had distinct boundaries. Initially, Johnson speculated whether it was a diminutive aircraft, maybe doing an emergency descent. He advanced prudently down Minnesota State 220 Road. Within a few seconds, the light swiftly moved towards him, appearing just in front of him. It collided with his patrol car. The cacophony of shattering glass and mangled metal assaulted his auditory senses as his vision was overwhelmed by the radiant brilliance of the light. Subsequently, while the patrol car was still moving, he lost consciousness. Upon regaining consciousness, the car had moved roughly 800 feet from his previous known position and was now positioned perpendicular to the road. He examined the time shown on the dashboard's clock. The time was 2:19 in the morning, and according to reports, he had apparently misplaced over 40 minutes. Moreover, when retrospectively examining the road behind him, conspicuous black skid tracks were evident, undoubtedly caused by his vehicle. Johnson was unaware that an unidentified force had activated the brakes of the vehicle in an attempt to stop it. Confused, he extended his hand towards the radio situated on the dashboard of the car. Upon seeking aid, a colleague from the Marshall County Police Force, Everett Doolittle, promptly arrived at the location and subsequently requested medical assistance. Johnson, predictably, was discovered to be in a state of shock and was complaining of extremely painful eyes. He was taken to Warren Hospital for a series of exams and X-rays. It was discovered that he had ocular damage, which closely resembled the kind of injury that a welder can experience in the course of their work. Additional investigations revealed minor harm to the inner eye, which is in line with being subjected to an intense light source at a short distance. One intriguing aspect of the entire incident, particularly at the location, was that both Johnson's wristwatch and the clock in the patrol car were precisely 14 minutes behind. Considering the fact that the perpetrator was a fellow member of their organization, a prompt police inquiry would ensue. Initially, there were speculations that the incident was caused by ball lightning, while some suggested that the bright light that caused Johnson to lose consciousness may have originated from the overhead power lines at the area. Nevertheless, it is understandable that some researchers who approached the occurrence from a UFO standpoint were somewhat skeptical of these original explanations. Upon closer examination of the case, including the analysis of the specific physical damage to the vehicle, it becomes evident that an incident did occur to Johnson on the isolated road in Minnesota. However, the particular nature of this incident remains somewhat unclear. It is crucial to thoroughly investigate the police car and the extent of the damage it incurred in this case. As an illustration, Johnson remembered perceiving the sound of shattering glass as he lost consciousness. The windscreen sustained significant damage, and the glass cracked as if it had been struck directly by something. In addition, the antennas located at the rear of the vehicle's roof were severely deformed. This hint would be crucial in evaluating what objects may or may not have made touch with Johnson's automobile. Some investigators argue that this damage was caused by an object colliding with the antennae. Alternatively, some researchers may argue that the antennas became deformed due to the forceful forward motion caused by applying the brakes. Subsequently, they would forcefully impact the crimson dome of the police lights, resulting in its deformation due to the intense heat. Nevertheless, during the experiments carried out at Honeywell Labs in Minneapolis, it became evident that the antennas were bent as a result of external force rather than the combination of high temperature and rapid movement. Essentially, Johnson's patrol car was impacted by a tangible object. Moreover, it seems like the left side of the car bore the main impact of the incident. The extent of the damage to the windscreen turned out to be more captivating than originally anticipated. Although ball lightning was initially considered as a possible explanation, subsequent investigations, including those conducted by the Center for UFO Studies, have failed to provide a definitive answer for the cause of the encounter. In addition, there was absolutely no evidence indicating that Johnson had fabricated any aspect of the incident. In addition, his reputation and credibility were consistently flawless. Additionally, numerous captivating information would emerge during the ongoing investigations and conversations around the case. By sheer coincidence, Johnson had undergone dental treatment shortly before the incident, and he was scheduled to have additional follow-up work done after the encounter. X-rays were collected during the initial dental procedure in order to prepare for further work. The X-rays would demonstrate that Johnson's bridgework on his front teeth was entirely satisfactory. However, during the subsequent process, the bridgework was no longer intact. Furthermore, they were fractured at the gum line. Johnson should have experienced significant edema and intense discomfort as a consequence of this. Nevertheless, he did not experience either of them. What happened to Garrett Bardsley? The disappearance of Garrett Bardsley remains one of the most haunting wilderness mysteries in modern American history. What began as a joyful family and scouting trip into the mountains of Utah transformed within hours into a baffling vanishing that would leave no answers behind. Even decades later, the events of that August morning continue to trouble investigators, searchers, and all who have studied the case. Garrett Alexander Bardsley was born on the 24th of July, 1992, to parents Heidi and Kevin Bardsley. The youngest of 4 children, Garrett was described as kind, cheerful, and deeply devoted to his faith. Raised in a Mormon household active within the LDS Church, he found purpose and confidence through school, family, and the Boy Scouts. Though reading did not come easily to him, Garrett was known for his determination and positive outlook. He loved learning, loved nature, and loved the sense of belonging that scouting provided. By the summer of 2004, Garrett had already earned a merit badge in wilderness survival and was comfortable spending time outdoors. Camping trips were familiar and exciting experiences for him, though they were not without moments of fear. On one previous outing, Garrett had unexpectedly encountered a bear at close range, an experience that frightened him deeply but left him physically unharmed. Despite that moment, his enthusiasm for outdoor adventures never faded. On the 19th of August, 2004, Garrett traveled with his father Kevin, his two brothers, and a large group of Boy Scouts and fathers to the Cuberant Lake area in Utah's Winter Mountains. The group consisted of 18 scouts between the ages of 12 and 18, along with 8 adult leaders and parents. The hike into the area was uneventful, and the group set up camp roughly a third of a mile from Cuberant Lake. Scoutmaster Wally Trotter was unable to attend due to work obligations, but the trip proceeded as planned. Early the next morning, on the 20th of August, Garrett woke before most of the camp. His father suggested they go fishing at one of the nearby unnamed lakes in the basin. Carrying fishing poles, the two walked from camp toward the water. Accounts differ on the exact distance, but law enforcement maps later indicated they were likely more than 300 yards from camp, positioned along the northern shore of the lake. The terrain consisted of a basin with mixed forest and open ground, surrounded by steep slopes that rose sharply in all directions. At some point during their time by the water, Garrett slipped into wet ground or shallow water near the lake or a nearby stream. His pants and shoes became soaked, and he quickly grew cold. Kevin suggested that Garrett return to camp to change into dry clothes while he stayed behind to continue fishing. He asked his son if he knew the way back, and Garrett confidently said that he did. The route was believed to be straightforward, a relatively direct path back to camp. As Garrett began walking away, Kevin noticed that he initially headed in the wrong direction and corrected him. Once redirected, Garrett turned and walked off toward camp. It was approximately 8 in the morning. Within moments, the 12-year-old disappeared from view among the trees. After about 15 minutes passed with no sign of Garrett at camp, Kevin became concerned and returned himself. To his shock, Garrett had never arrived. The group immediately began searching the area, calling Garrett's name and spreading out through the surrounding woods. No response came back. There were no sounds, no movement, and no visible clues. The urgency of the situation quickly became clear. Nighttime temperatures in the Winter Mountains can drop dramatically, even in late summer. Knowing this, the group expanded the search rapidly. Law enforcement and search and rescue teams were alerted, and within hours a massive operation was underway. Over 1,000 volunteers eventually joined the effort, searching on foot, on horseback, and from helicopters. Bloodhounds were brought in, and divers searched the lake itself. Despite the scale and intensity of the search, nothing belonging to Garrett was found. Not his fishing pole, not his clothing, not even a clear footprint trail. The only potential clue was a single sock located during the search, but DNA testing later confirmed that it did not belong to him. The absence of physical evidence became one of the most troubling aspects of the case. As days passed without results, the search was gradually shifted from rescue to recovery. The realization that Garrett could not survive indefinitely in the wilderness weighed heavily on everyone involved. Kevin Bardsley later described experiencing a strange and overwhelming feeling during the search, a moment that he struggled to explain but that stayed with him long after the effort ended. The impact of Garrett's disappearance was devastating, particularly for his brother Cameron, to whom he had been especially close. The family chose to honor Garrett's memory by creating the Garrett Bardsley Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping locate missing persons and supporting humanitarian efforts abroad. In an extraordinary twist of fate, Kevin later assisted in the search for another Boy Scout, Brennan Hawkins, who disappeared in the same mountain range and was ultimately found safe. Over the years, independent researchers and content creators have revisited the area. One such investigator, known online as the Missing Enigma, walked the trails leading to the lake and noted how narrow and poorly defined some paths were. He observed how easily someone could wander off course. Yet even he struggled to understand how Garrett could have left the basin at all, given how thoroughly the interior had been searched and how difficult the surrounding terrain would have been to climb. Authorities have consistently stated that they do not believe outside interference was involved. Still, certain details continue to raise questions. Investigators reportedly spoke with an inmate at one point, though no information about that conversation has ever been released. Additionally, in 2009, a tip was submitted to America's Most Wanted by a woman claiming she had seen Garrett with two unidentified men in a grocery store. This sighting was never confirmed. In 2006, a hunter found a shoe near Cuberant Lake that appeared weathered and similar to what Garrett had worn. However, it was ultimately determined to be too large to belong to him. Once again, hope turned to disappointment. Today, Garrett Bardsley has never been found. Mysterious apparition. This unsettling image, captured inside a recently vacated home, has become a chilling piece of evidence for those who believe in unexplained activity within familiar spaces. At first glance, the photograph appears to show an ordinary interior, a staircase, a hallway, and the quiet stillness of an empty house. Yet closer inspection reveals something far more disturbing, a dark, humanoid silhouette standing in the center of the room where no one should have been. According to the former occupant, the house had a long history of intense spiritual activity. Unusual sounds, unexplained movements, and an overwhelming sense of being watched were reportedly common occurrences during their time living there. Because of this, the homeowner kept a CCTV system running continuously, even while away, to monitor the property. The camera feed was linked to a public monitoring platform known as Asylum Cam, where viewers could observe live or recorded footage. The figure in the image was not discovered by the homeowner at first, but by members of the Asylum Cam community. Roughly 45 minutes after the residents had left town to shop, viewers noticed what appeared to be a tall, shadowy form standing near the base of the staircase. The timing is critical, as the house was confirmed to be completely empty, with no pets, guests, or possible intruders inside. The doors were locked, and there was no indication of forced entry. What makes the image especially unsettling is the clarity of the silhouette. The figure appears solid, upright, and human in shape, yet completely lacking facial features or detail. It casts no discernible reflection and seems darker than the surrounding shadows, suggesting it is not the result of lighting or camera distortion. The homeowner firmly stated that there was no possible explanation involving a living person. With no one present and no signs of normal activity, the figure's appearance remains unexplained. To those familiar with reports of shadow entities, the image closely matches descriptions of such phenomena, often associated with locations said to carry residual or ongoing spiritual energy. To this day, the photograph stands as a haunting reminder that some places may hold presences unseen, revealing themselves only when no one is meant to be there. The mystery of Christopher Tompkins. The disappearance of Christopher Tompkins remains one of the most unsettling, unsolved mysteries associated with people vanishing in ordinary circumstances. On the surface, it appears to be a straightforward workday that abruptly turned inexplicable. Yet the deeper the details are examined, the more troubling the case becomes. More than 2 decades later, no clear answers have emerged, and Christopher has never been located. Christopher Carlton Tompkins was born on the 28th of December, 1981. At the time he vanished, he was 20 years old and living with his mother, Ann Mackenzie, in Ellerslie, Georgia. He was described by those who knew him as outgoing, cheerful, and deeply committed to his faith. He worked for a surveying company as part of a 4-man crew, a job he reportedly enjoyed and took seriously. On the morning of the 25th of January, 2002, Christopher arrived at work at 8 in the morning and travelled with a co-worker to a wooded job site near County Line Road in Harris County. The crew worked in a straight line formation, each man positioned roughly 50 feet apart. This setup made it easy for them to see one another throughout the day. They paused for lunch and resumed work around 1:30 in the afternoon. Moments later, something extraordinary occurred. One of the surveyors had been speaking directly with Christopher when he briefly turned his head away. When he looked back only seconds later, Christopher was gone. His tools remained exactly where he had been standing. There was no sound, no movement, and no indication that anything unusual had occurred. At first, the crew assumed Christopher had stepped into the woods for a short break. When he failed to return, concern quickly set in. The men searched the surrounding area but found nothing. A call was made to one surveyor's wife, yet Christopher's mother was not informed until after 4 in the afternoon. By that time, valuable hours had passed. Once authorities were alerted, an official search began, with family members joining in the effort. One of the earliest discoveries raised immediate alarm. A single work boot belonging to Christopher was found hanging from the top of a barbed wire fence near the work site. Nearby, a blue thread believed to have come from his clothing was also found. Coins thought to be his were scattered on the ground close by. Despite these clues, there were no signs of a struggle, no visible injuries, and no evidence pointing clearly in any direction. Search dogs were brought in, including bloodhounds, yet none were able to track Christopher's scent. The trail appeared to stop abruptly. With no physical evidence and no witnesses, the investigation stalled. Then, 6 months later, Christopher's other boot was discovered by a farmer on private land less than 1 mile away. No other belongings were ever found. Authorities eventually closed the case, concluding that Christopher had voluntarily left to begin a new life. This explanation deeply troubled his family, who insisted there was no indication he intended to leave. His mother stated firmly that her son showed no signs of distress or unusual behavior prior to that day. Several unsettling details remain unresolved. One co-worker reportedly retained a lawyer immediately after Christopher vanished. Another surveyor was later sentenced for an unrelated violent offense. The surveying company's name and the identities of the crew members were never publicly released. Christopher's employer claimed he had been acting strangely, a statement his mother strongly disputed. Christopher's disappearance is often associated with missing 411 cases, a term used to describe unexplained vanishings in natural settings.